Well, hello, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are joining us from today. I do want to thank you for taking this time out. I really appreciate you taking the time to invest in your national ministry by finding out more about the leadership pipeline process. My name is Paul Cheesman. I'm part of the Global Leadership Development and Human Resources team. Just to get you started and orientated, you're probably in one of three categories. Certainly, this is what we've designed today's training for. Firstly, you're possibly someone that's never touched the leadership pipeline before. You don't know anything about it. You're just intrigued to find out what it's about. That's great. Super good. This is just what we're here for. Second category is people that have sort of known about it. It's possibly been on your to-do list or your strategic plan for a little while now. It just hasn't seemed to happen in some way. Hopefully today will get you launched, whether you're in leadership development and human resources or you're part of a wider leadership team. The third category of people is you've figured out the process, all the documentation that's involved, but it's stalled along the way somewhere. Quite often because it's just got too complicated or too time consuming to follow through with. I feel your pain. I have been there myself, and hopefully today will give you a bit of an easier on-ramp to restart the leadership pipeline process. If you're here for any other reason, then you're welcome. And I do hope we pique your interest along the way. A bit of background, first of all. The global LDHR team have been doing what we've called staff life cycle surveys for the past couple of years. And the leadership pipeline has consistently received scores that are high in terms of need and desire, but low in terms of implementation and confidence about the process. So we've made it a bit of a priority, certainly for this coming year. Today won't be your last opportunity to engage around this process. This general sense out there that the LPP is what's needed, but seems somehow overwhelming. So, as I say, it tends to appear on the things we'll do next year list rather than this year's strategic plan. And this, as a background, is exactly why we've developed what we've called the LPP LITE. There's loads of stuff on ldhr.org. If you're not familiar with the site, do head there after you've finished watching this. Loads of things, both for LDHR professionals and for other leaders. The front page will help you navigate there. So loads of stuff on the site for the leadership pipeline process. But we realize this kind of sophisticated, everything you need to know approach became a bit overwhelming. And what people needed was actually just something to get them off the starting line. I've worked with a few national ministries over the last few years and with our own VP team as well. And my experience is that we have smart leaders who don't have a problem making things more robust and detailed as they go along. But when it comes to the LPP, it means the process seemed to have become burdensome really quickly. So my encouragement for you today, start slim, keep it simple, be intuitive from the knowledge that you already have about your people and build from there rather than trying to start with gathering loads of information and data and getting bogged down in the process. So, what is the LPP all about? A little bit of a quiz to get you going. Have a think about this. If you're sitting watching by yourself, if you're with somebody else, you might want a little quick chat as you go along. Would you say, is the primary purpose of developing a leadership pipeline about one, appointing successors for roles right now, two, miraculously discovering leaders that you didn't know about, three, preparing a pool of leaders for the future, or four, sounding really impressive at your next regional team meeting? I can see the cogs whirring there. Brilliant. Well done. Well, if you said one, I'm afraid you might be a bit disappointed with today. It's really not going to get you much help for your immediate needs that you're struggling with at the moment. Um, there is, however, a leader selection process on ldhr.org, so you might want to head there and have a look at what we've got there. If you said two, well, it's not what today is designed for, the LPP is designed for, but it's quite often the case that actually, when you start looking at some of your existing leaders and looking at them in a new light, you do discover undiscovered talent in there. If you said three, spot on. That's the primary purpose for the leadership pipeline, preparing leaders for the future. And if you said four, obviously it's very cool to talk about these things when you're with other leaders as you gather together. So you get bonus points if you put number four down. This is kind of like my working definition. And as I've said, this is a bit unauthorized. So if you've got another one that you're working with, that's good as well. But the leadership pipeline process is broadly a future-focused process that enables leadership teams to prepare for succession and expansion needs by identifying, assessing, and developing their potential leaders. It's not a quick fix because you're in a leadership crisis or a vacuum right now, but it's looking forward to help you prevent that crisis in the future. It's often introduced a bit too late when you want to jump straight from identifying potential leaders to appointing them. But the LPP is more of a preparation tool than that, and hopefully something that becomes part of an annual cycle, the fruit of which can be used as needed. Let's dig into the LPP LITE process itself. If you want to follow along on your own deck of slides, and I do recommend that you download these at some point because they've got a whole load of stuff in them. This is the QR code, so you can click on there and follow along in your own deck as we go. So, the overview of the leadership pipeline process. As we mentioned, there's lots of tools on ldhr.org, but it's distilled down into three main things. Identifying the leaders needed now and for succession and for expansion. Secondly, assessing, discussing potential leaders and looking at development opportunities. And thirdly, the actual development, creating development plans, coaching and tracking their progress. Basically, it's what do we need, who have we got, and how do we prepare them? What do we need? Who have we got? How do we prepare them? Let's take it a piece at a time and see how it goes. The first part of the process is, as we've said, the identify piece. The first thing and the most important thing is gathering your leaders together. This is what we've in the wider LPP process we've called the people meeting. If you've got a strategic plan for your national ministry, that's super great at this point. There may well be other information on how the ministry is doing that can guide the discussion. But the most important part is gathering leaders together who between them have a good knowledge of the state of your national movement right now and two, the leaders that you want to discuss. The first part of this conversation involves identifying your leadership needs by considering the leaders that are needed currently for filling roles. As we've said, this isn't the primary purpose, but you need to factor it in terms of leadership roles that have been lying vacant already and you need a solution for. But secondly, leaders needed because of succession. Roles that you kind of expect to become vacant because the current role holder is maybe retiring or is just expected to move on, either to another role that maybe you've lined up for them already, or that you just kind of know they're moving on from the organisation. This is just your best guess. It doesn't need to be scientific. Rumor and insider knowledge is your friend in this. And thirdly, you need to be considering leaders that you anticipate a need for because of expansion plans. This is where looking at your strategic plan comes in really important. Roles that you know will be needed as hopefully and prayerfully your movement grows. If you're watching with somebody else right now, or if you'd just like to see what this feels like, it might be worth pausing at this point and having a go. This is a link to a sample of the leadership needs form. It's a worksheet, you don't need to do it, but it just kind of guides your discussion a little bit. So this is a little bit of what it might feel like to have a go. From your own experience then, what would you anticipate being the top 3 needed skills or mindsets for each of these listed roles? We've come up with just a few examples. You might want to pick your own as you consider it. This, like most of our documents, you can't edit directly, but you can make a copy and then you can scroll all over it to your heart's content. Have a go at that and see how you get on. So, how did it go? I imagine it may well have been a bit more complex when you started digging into it than you first anticipated. If you didn't say, well, it kind of depends on at least a few of those roles, you may well have missed something along the way. There are lots of tools out there to help you identify competencies and qualifications needed for roles. And hopefully you've got a role guide or a job description when you come to do this yourself for your own roles. But again, please start simple. Think about some of the rarer qualities that are needed for the positions that you're looking for. So if it's a campus director for a new campus, as was on one of the sheets, you're probably looking at things like initiative and creativity more so than maybe an existing campus director might need. Specifics are really important again in this section. People quite often tend to default to categories like communication skills, but there's so much in there. So try and be as specific as possible. If it's a communications director, for instance, what kind of communications director are you looking for? Are you looking for somebody that can predominantly do all the writing, so it's writing skills that you're after? Is it somebody that's going to be up front speaking to groups, so it's that public speaking skills? Is it actually an editor of other people's work that is the niche skill that you're looking for? Is it a team already, so you're after somebody that can coordinate and that can lead other specialists? Be as specific as possible because it will really help you when you come to think about the development piece. So, moving on to part 2, the assess piece in this. We've done the who do we need bit, and now we're on to the who have we got part. There's no real science to how many. It all depends on how many people that you're considering. It all depends on your own capacity and the size of the ministry that you have. Typically, we say around 3 to 8 people in this LPP pool is a really good start. Less than 3, it's not really a pool anymore. And more than 8, and it becomes a little bit unmanageable at any given level of the organisation. You may have a number of different layers in a larger ministry where different leadership teams are considering their pipelines. But for any given one, 3 to 8 is a good starting point. Just to clarify, these are not the only people that you're developing in your national ministry at any given time, certainly hopefully. But this is about identifying leaders with potential that you want to consider and focus on. Again, there are various methods out there for identifying them. The 9-box one of performance and potential is helpful. But again, for the first time that you're doing this, my encouragement is keep it simple and work from the knowledge that you've got in the room. If you've got the right leaders, a lot of these things fall into place. Got the right leaders in the room. Um, in terms of the who, quite often it's just simply a democratic process. Have all your leaders pick one or two people, or have one or two people for each of your ministries if you've got a number of different ministries. Um, Picking potential leaders rather than trying to identify potential successors is really helpful for giving you a broad pool that actually you can develop a bit of cross-pollination with as you're thinking about development. You often get surprised along the way about somebody that you're considering initially for this role over here, but actually you suddenly realize they might be a really good fit for that. That's how I ended up in LDHR. So for each person, what you want to do is consider firstly, what are the potential possible leadership roles that you could see them progressing into in the next 1 to 3 years, we typically say. Secondly, what would be their greatest developmental needs for them to get ready and prepare well for these roles? And thirdly, on from that, what would be developmental assignments or opportunities that you could give them now and over the next couple of years to help prepare them best? We've got fuller versions again on ldhr.org that give a full kind of like leader profile where you're gathering lots of other kind of like biographical and personal info ahead of the discussion. But again, particularly for a smaller team, you can do this intuitively. You're the people that know them best. So again, this might be a helpful point to pause in the video and have a go yourself. Little bit of an exercise. Why not think about your context and your LDHR role or your other leadership role if you're wider than LDHR? Who do you know that you think would be a possible candidate to take on your role in the next few years? Try not to think of somebody that just looks a bit like you, but somebody that you could see down the line might be able to do your role. In light of the skills and qualities that you already need, that you already know you need to do your role, what would be a good developmental assignment to give them currently? Um, what, yeah, sorry, back up. What would be one really key developmental need that you think this person would have in order to best prepare them to do your role? And then on from that, can you think of a good developmental assignment or opportunity that you could give them that would help address that developmental need? Have a pause, click on the link if you want. This is the conversation summary that we suggest leadership teams use just to pull together all the information on the folk that they're considering. But have a go at that and just think through, as I say, your role, just one potential candidate, and what might their developmental need be, and how could you actually bring that into an opportunity for them. If you've done that, well done. Again, it might have been trickier when you actually start coming down to distilling what those needs really look like and how you could fulfill those needs. It might have felt a little bit theoretical as well, particularly doing it in this kind of an exercise. Creating good developmental opportunities is quite an art. A few resources that might be helpful along the way. I haven't got them on there, but there's links in the document. Firstly, there's an article on what we call the 5 E's, 5 E's of development: environment, experience, equipping or education, exposure, and evaluation. Those are some of the elements that are really helpful to think about as you think, how might we create an opportunity for this person to develop? And specifically, we've got another linked resource in there on key developmental assignments in particular, and just giving you a whole load of examples of what key developmental assignments for different areas might look like. download the slide deck and click on the links for that. As we've said, it can always be a little bit more complex, particularly at first, but there's lots of tools to identify these things. But again, encouragement is start these things simply and build up your own competence muscle as you go through. So the third and final part of this process is the development itself. This involves the identified developmental assignments and making sure that the work that you've done is well communicated and tracked for each of the potential leaders. This is where it gets messy and, in my experience, where it's most likely to fall down. You can have a great conversation in the room, but the transfer to implementation is often the trickiest bit. If you're a small national ministry, then the chances are the leader of the people that you've been talking about is probably sitting in the room with you in this conversation. That makes it fairly simple to then introduce the developmental assignment that you've talked about as a KDA into their regular position focused conversations, and it just becomes a suggested part of their ongoing development. If the leader's not in the room, then obviously there's a little bit of connecting to do to determine who's going to have the conversation with that individual's leader to make sure the developmental opportunity is implemented well. If you're working at a regional or another global team level, then this is where it does get really tricky. Because in all likelihood, the people that you've been talking about are in other national ministries and don't report to you. Obviously, this is where we need to be really sensitive to balancing the needs of building your own team's capacity while not draining capacity from a national ministry. Being married to a national team leader myself, I'm very aware of how this can feel when it comes to the national ministry. But hopefully, development itself is something that you can both agree on. So start the conversation with the national ministry and just see where it goes. From this point, as I say, it becomes about moving the conversation on from a one-time event where you're all sat in a room together to something that looks like a cycle. So it's the when do you want to review progress and when do you want to have this wider conversation again? In terms of reviewing progress, 2 or 3 times a year would be super helpful to just have a brief discussion back in this room or the leadership team on how things are going and whether anything's got tripped up on the way. Having this wider conversation, certainly annually, is a really great place to start. That way you can actually track and flow and keep up with what things are happening. There may well be people that are still continue to be in the pipeline. But looking at the what's next or the how's it going is really important. As I mentioned, there are loads of other resources around this on ldhr.org. If you're not familiar with it, do head over to ldhr.org. Under the strategy tab is where you will find all the details about the leadership pipeline process. If you've got more conversations, I mean, we're all always up for more conversations, but more questions in particular, you might want to contact the LDHR Llama. He is there 24/7 just for you to answer all the questions that you have. So do reach out and get in touch with the Llama. He's available at llama@crew.org. Drop him a line and we can start the conversation and make sure you're connected to the right people to help you move this forward. As I say, the key thing following on from this is this slide deck. We've embedded all the links that we've talked about in there. So do grab that QR code and download the resource. The last slide on this isn't really a one to show you, but it's just to show you that this is where all the links to the resources are. So as I say, this is the best way forward. Get this slide deck and you can take it from there. thank you again for joining, for watching, for investing in the time. And know that even now, as I stop this recording, I'm going to be praying for you as you implement this in your national ministries. I'm praying that this is not only a really positive time for you as a national ministry, but that God will really use this to develop, grow your leaders and your capacity as national ministries for the sake of the Great Commission that the Lord calls us to. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again soon.